The Mosaic Law Defined. So, what exactly is the Mosaic Law? Is it a bunch of laws? A bunch of statutes? Ordinances? Precepts? Judgments? Maybe it's just a list of commandments? So, what exactly is the law? Shalom and Shalom Israel. Hello Christians. What up everyone else? Welcome to today's discussion of Something to Think About, presented by the brothers. Today's discussion is on the Mosaic Law Defined. They definition, DOI definition. Disciples of Yahawashi. Hashtag law defined. Administrative. We will quickly go over some administrative details like we always do before we get started. However, if you want, you can jump over to the recap section now and continue there. Setting expectations. I plan on reading virtually everything on my slides and my notes since some people, they can't watch, they can only listen. I will be following a script that helps me to stay on point. Reminder, this is more like a classroom setting, a discussion, so there will be no smoke and daggers here. Pause if needed. These are some of the sources we will use in today's discussion. Pause if needed. Here are some additional sources. Pause if needed. Here's the last source. Note, we do not claim that any source we use and/or reference is 100. Pause if needed. Fair use disclaimer. This video is for educational and scholarly purposes only. Pause if needed. Doctrine disclaimer. This video contains our personal opinions and interpretations and is not meant to dictate doctrine. This video does not contain hate speech, nor do we condone violence of any kind. Pause if needed. Recap. What we discussed in overview parts 1, 2, and 3. We encourage everyone to watch the overview videos. They cover the beginnings and foundations of this series, Christianity and the canon. For example, they created a religion about 2,000 years ago. They religion is not a carryover from the Israelite writings. They created what we call a Bible and a canon today. They canonization process was solely to promote Christianity. They process did not help the Negro or any Israelite. For most platforms, we have a playlist called Christianity and the Canon. We encourage you to check it out. What we discussed: Negro Bible mini-series. This series included the following topics: Negro Bible statistics and stories, and what were included and excluded. Negro indoctrination, including the Negro Slave Report of 1824. How we were called species, animals, barbarians, and savages. The role of evolution, and we discussed slavery versus inhumane treatment. Negroes were a spiritual people, civilized, clean, led a simple lifestyle. Negroes were forced to believe in Christianity by religious institutions. Political, educational, and economic benefits of the slave Bible. It didn't benefit us, it benefited they. And we discussed who causes wars and conflict in Africa. Okay, something to think about. What we discussed: Chosen People, Parts 1 and 2. We discussed how they defined chosen and chosen people. We used the Israelite writings to define and/or describe chosen people. We demonstrated why Israel was chosen. We described Israel physically and nationally. We identified divine characteristics of Israel. We discussed how Israelites are an everlasting people by covenant. We discussed Israel's replacements as told by these church fathers: Justin Martyr, Clement and Origen of Alexandria, and Augustine of Hippo. We encourage everyone to watch all of our previous videos. We do our best not to go over previous material, but instead we reference material in our previous videos as much or little as possible. Before we get into today's discussion, it's time to give all praises to the Most High. Once again, how we do it.
All praise to the Most High.
All right now.
All
Sing it.
praise to the Most High.
Go ahead, brother.
All
Come on now.
praise to the Most High.
All right now.
All praise.
Praise to the Most High.
Praise him. Come on now. Come on.
All praises.
All praises.
Come on now.
All praises.
All right
All
now.
to the Most High. To the high. Praises. Come on now. All
Go ahead.
praises. All praises. Praise high. Praises. Praise high. Praise to the Most High.
Yahawashi.
Okay. Again, I hope you enjoyed that. Yes, we are different. But I like to say, if it wasn't for the Most High, I couldn't do what I do. You couldn't do what you do. Okay, so let's continue. The Mosaic Law defined. This series in general is on Christianity and the canonization process. Today's topic is not about the content or the application of the Mosaic Law, but the definition of the law and specific words used to describe and or define the law. The brothers are not camp leaders. There are many Israelite camps that are very knowledgeable on what is in the law. However, they all do not agree on the application or the substance of the law. Each camp encourages how their members should live according to their interpretation of the law. The brothers will not advise anyone on how to live because we are not camp leaders or teachers. We are just two brothers presenting information as we discover it and giving our opinions every now and then. Okay, I would like to add, we respect the camps. Has the written law been replaced with written letters and epistles? In this presentation, we will discuss what is the law. In an upcoming video, we will discuss the supposed replacement of the law. Hashtag law to epistle. That's law, the number 2, epistle. The agenda for today. We'll go over words and many phrases, how they define specific law descriptors, how DOI defines law, what is included in the law, what is excluded from the law given to Israelites, law is a covenant and sign, law is everlasting and righteousness, law is truth and perfect, words and many phrases. How the law is called, described, defined. This is where we're going to start today. When searching the internet, one will find that the law is called, described, and defined with many different words and many phrases. Some of these words or many phrases include being called the Pentateuch and Mosaic Covenant, described as Old Covenant law, defined as a set of rules and instructions. Okay? The following are many of those words and many phrases one has heard whether you've been in church for decades, you just talk to people, or you're just living. You're going to hear these words and many phrases describe the law. So this is the first page of words and many phrases. No order of significance. I just threw them on the screen. And I'm curious, do you recognize any of these? The answer is yes. So most of us, recognize, like, let me get on my pen here. The Old Testament law, okay? The written law, the oral law, moral laws, Old Covenant, okay? Law of Moses. So go ahead and take a second here if you need. Pause if needed. I'm going to move on to the next screen. Here are some more. And let's see if you recognize any of these, like the 613 Commandments, ceremonial laws, Mosaic Code, Precepts, okay, Decalogue, Book of the Covenant. Okay, so here's some more. If you want, pause if needed. If you want to find the definition of a word or topic that is in the Bible, then the first place to go should always be the Israelite writings, okay? These are the so-called Old Testament and the Apocrypha. We just call it Israelite writings. Okay? It can be confusing trying to use the Bible to describe the law. It can also be very confusing trying to use the Bible to define or describe the very word used to define and describe the law. It appears that many of the words used to define and or describe the law are interchangeable. Also, there are many verses in the Bible that have more than one of these defining words or descriptors in the same verse. Okay? Mosaic Law Descriptors. Words used to describe the law. These are the main words or descriptors within the Israelite writings which are used in describing the law or parts of it. And these are the words that just many people use. We got laws, statutes, ordinances, precepts, judgments, commandments. Here are examples of verses using more than one descriptor. Exodus 16 and 28 KJV. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? Two descriptors. Deuteronomy 6 and 1 KJV. Now, these are the judgments, the statutes. These are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you. So you see there's 3 descriptors in Deuteronomy 6:1. Nehemiah 9 and 14, KJV. And made known unto them thy holy Sabbath, and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant. Okay? 2 Kings 17 and 37. And the statutes, and the ordinances, and the law, and the commandment, which he wrote for you, ye shall observe to do. There's 4 descriptors that people typically use to describe the law in this one verse. Okay? There are many more passages that contain more than one descriptor used to describe and or define the law or parts of it. We just listed 4 of them. Missing descriptors. In all of these verses, if one descriptor is missing, does that one descriptor not apply? For example, Deuteronomy 6:1 mentions commandments, statutes, and judgments. Does that mean that laws, precepts, and ordinances are not to be taught? Okay?
That's something to think about.
Something to think about. Statute Descriptor. Okay, so right now we're going to go over this one, statutes, and we're going to quickly go over this and see what it is. How they define statute. Okay, whenever we read definitions, know that this is the boring stuff. However, we need to understand what they think, and we need a baseline. Also understand that these are dictionary definitions, even when they mention biblical references, okay? And like I said in previous videos, we use dictionaries from the 1800s to 1913, typically because they seem more authentic. Okay, the first definition of statute: an act of the legislature of a state that extends its binding force to all the citizens or subjects of that state. Statutes owe their binding force to a positive command or declaration of the supreme power. Common law owes its binding force to long use and the consent of a nation. A special act of the supreme power of a private nature or intended to operate only on an individual or company. Statute is commonly applied to the acts of a legislative body consisting of representatives. In monarchies, legislature laws of the sovereign are called edicts, decrees, ordinances, rescripts, etc. Statutes may be divided into statutes real, statutes personal, and statutes mixed. Statutes real applying to immovables, statutes personals to movables, and statutes mixed to both classes of property. How the Blue Man defines statute, H2706. So we're going to go to the blue letter and just take a quick look and see what's over there for 2706. So bear with me here, H276. And let's get over there. So as you can see here, this is the Blue Letter Bible, and we're on Strong's H2706. And this here is the pronunciation of the Hebrew word, but I don't think it's Paleo. I actually think it's Yiddish, but we're going to listen to them anyways every time we come over here to see how they pronounce this.
Strong's H2706. Hulk.
Okay, whenever you hear that throat clearing or the rolling R's, I always think Yiddish. I could be wrong. One thing I always like to look at in blue letter is this here. How many times was that Hebrew word translated to English in the Old Testament here? In this case, you see it's 127 times. Let me check my notes here. Okay. So, and then we can see here that we are on statute. And you can see here 87 times statute was used as the English word to translate that Hebrew word so we can read it and understand. And since it's the most, to me, that's a sign that this is probably the main definition, but I could be wrong. So we're also going to see here there's ordinance in here. And let me see here, commandments right here. So there's two more descriptors that are actually translated to the same Hebrew word. So let's look down here. In biblical usage, not the definition, we see things like statute, ordinance, limit, okay, prescribed task. We got portion right here. Let's see, prescribed due. We got prescribed limit, boundary, okay. Let's go down to the definition here. And what do we see here? We see it's an appointment of time, space, quantity, labor, or usage. Okay? We even see commandment down here. We see decree. We're going to get to this later. So it's a portion, set time, statute, or task. All right? We're going to jump back over to here. And let me see what my notes say. So under the definition of H2706, we see this, an enactment, hence an appointment of time, space, quantity, labor, or usage. We also see other descriptors, okay? We see commandment, law, ordinance with statute in the same definition. Okay, this is an example of what I call circular definition. A term is defined using other terms that eventually loop back to the original word. Okay, circular definition. This adds to the confusing element of how we define this thing called law when we're using words that have same words in it and it loops right back to the original word. So it adds to the confusion. Let's continue. So this one, H2708. Strong's definition, it's another word that has been translated to statute in English for us. This is the feminine of what we just read, 2706, meaning basically the same thing. So it looks like statute is a good translation for 2706 and 2708, and a good word for describing the law or parts of it. Ordinance Descriptor. Next, we're going to look at the descriptor ordinance right here, okay, and see what it has to say. How they define ordinance. Again, the boring part, definitions. A rule established by authority, a permanent rule of action. An ordinance may be a law, a statute of sovereign power. In this sense, it is often used in the scriptures. A statute, law, regulation, rescript, or accepted usage, an edict or decree. The word has sometimes been applied to the statutes of Parliament, but these are usually called acts or laws. Orderly arrangement, rank, order, station, preparation, provision. Observance commanded. This term in the Old Testament generally signifies that which God ordered for his people to observe. Appointment, established rite or ceremony. It is also applied to things in creation. God giveth the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night. So even the stars have ordinances. Okay. So Israelite writings, we're going to look at an example of ordinance H2706, Exodus 18 and 20. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk. Okay? This could have read, and thou shalt teach them statutes and laws, because it is the same Hebrew word. Okay? Ordinance, statutes, both go back to H2706. Okay? It adds to confusion. the same Strong's number for statute, so we just said that. Exodus 15 and 25. And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. So we got statute 2706, ordinance 4941. So we just illustrated that ordinance is also 2706. So this could have literally read like this. There he made for them an ordinance and an ordinance. Okay? Because ordinance is also 2706. Adds to confusion. Notice how statute and ordinance are in the same verse and now have two different Hebrew words and Strong's definitions. Okay? Keep that in mind. How the blue man defines ordinance, 4941. So here we're going to go to 4941. Let me key that in. Okay. So now we see here that we have 4941 Strong's right here. Here's the pronunciation. I'm going to click this so we can hear it.
Strong's H 4941. Mishpat. Mishpat.
Okay. Like I said, I always want to see how many times that Hebrew word, mishpat, was translated into English in the Old Testament. You see here it says 421. Okay, and right now we're looking for ordinance, okay? Ordinance. Notice the main word in English is judgment. 296 times it was translated, that Hebrew word, to judgment in the English. And look right here, ordinance, just 11 times out of 421. 421. Let's keep going down. So, biblical usage. We can see words like judgment, judgment, justice, ordinance, act of deciding a case, court, seat of judgment, procedure, litigation, before judges, okay, sentence, decision, execution, okay, justice. There's ordinance way down there. Let's go to the definition and see what we see here. So we got a verdict, okay, words like judicially, a sentence, okay, and we even see right here, formal decree. Let's see right here, the suit, the crime. You get it. It seems like this is more of a judgment descriptor, okay, instead of an ordinance descriptor. Let's go back here and see what I had to say. So under the definition for 4941, we're trying to look up ordinance. What do we see? We see all these kinds of words: verdict, formal decree, divine law, the crime, the penalty, adversary, charge, discretion, okay? And we see ordinance. So when you see all of these words, one could easily think this descriptor is judgment and not ordinance. Again, this adds to the confusing part. We're trying to figure out what is law, the definition. Okay, let's continue. 4931. How did the blue man define that? Okay, so we're going to go to 4931. Let me type that in here. And let's switch back over. So now we see this, Strong's H 4931. How do they pronounce it?
Strong's H 4931. Mishmereth. Mishmereth.
Okay, so like I said, I always want to see how many times was it translated. 78 times. and you see words like charge 50 times, way more than half. Ward, watch, keep, ordinance. Look at this, ordinance. 3 times out of 78 did they translate to English and use the word ordinance. Okay? So look at biblical usage, not definition, usage. You see guard, charge, function, obligation, service, watch. Okay? Office, function, keeping, preserving. Let's go down to the definition now. Definition. And we can see here, watch. Okay, the act, custody. Okay. We got the post, safe, figuratively, observance. Okay. Duty. Let's go down and look at a few of these here. So in Genesis 26:5, where this H4931 is used, we can see it says, and kept my charge. Okay. Exodus 12:6, and ye shall keep it. Okay. 49:31. Okay. And we're actually on ordinance. So let's go back and see what my notes say here. So we have the definition, and way down, oh, I didn't point this out. The misspelling. Let's go back over here real quick. So we're going to go here and go back to the definition. And we can see down here, ordinance, or whatever this word is in a definition. I couldn't find what this word is, so I'm thinking it's a misspelling. Maybe it should have said ordinance. So that's what I meant by the misspelling here. Let's go back here. So we see here's the definition. There's this word in there. So it seems like this adds to the confusion, because the only thing we see really in this whole blue man is this, what looks to be a misspelled word. Maybe ordinance shouldn't be used for 4931. It's just an opinion. Besides the word misspelled, would you believe 4931 has anything to do with ordinance? Probably not. So this seems to add a confusion. I'm just reading my notes here. Just give me a little more time, and hopefully I can clear this up just a little bit. How the blue man translates ordinance. We're going to go to the blue letter, and we're going to go to the lexicon, and we're going to look at how many times ordinance was translated for each of the 5 translations, okay? Go over here, go back here, and we're going to type in ordinance. And we're going to look at this right here, the lexicon. So we see here that it says 5 times the word ordinance was translated to Hebrew, 6 times to Greek. Usually that means 5 times Old Testament, 6 times New Testament, okay? So as you can see on the screen, here are the 5 H words, Strong's numbers that we just went through, okay? Here's how it's transliterated, and here are some of the, on the right, some of the words that have been translated to English. We're going to go through and just count each one real quick, or at least view it here. So H2706, okay, ordinance, translated the Hebrew word 127 times, but ordinance just 9 times out of 127 did they choose the word ordinance as the English translation. Okay, let's go to 2708. So you can see this was translated, that Hebrew word, 104 times, and ordinance 22 out of 104. Statute was the main word, which kind of tells me maybe it should be statute. Okay, let's go back here. Let's go to the third one, 4687. 181 times that Hebrew word was translated to English, and ordinance 1 time. 1 out of 181. Okay, Let's go back. 4931. Roll down here. That Hebrew word was translated 78 times, and ordinance 3 times. So 3 times they chose the English word ordinance to translate that Hebrew word. Okay? And let's go to 4941. So this one, 421 times that Hebrew word was translated to English in the what they call the Old Testament. And let's look for ordinance. Right here, ordinance. And out of 421 times, only 11 times was the word ordinance used as the English word to translate that Hebrew word. Okay? Go back. So this is just highlights of what I just pointed out. 2706, 127 times, ordinance just 9. 2708, 104 times translated, ordinance 22 was how many times they used the English word ordinance. 4687, 181 times, ordinance just 1. Okay, just 1 time. 4931, translated 78 times, ordinance 3 times was the times they used the word ordinance. 4941, 421 times, only 11 times did they translate it to ordinance in English. Okay? I am just suggesting that maybe the descriptor ordinance should have never been used as a translation from Hebrew to English as it relates to the law. It adds more confusion than clarity, in my opinion. However, the word itself, ordinance, seems to be a good word. Maybe the word ordinance was just misapplied. Not really sure, but based on what we saw, there was always another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different English words that was used to translate a certain Hebrew word more often than ordinance, so it's just an opinion. So here's a table to summarize it so we can see it easier. Here's all the strong numbers. Here's all the counts. How many times the strong or the Hebrew word was translated. And over on the right, how many times they used the word ordinance. Okay, so pause here if you want and take a look. Precept Descriptor. So now we're going to look at the descriptor precepts. Okay? So how they define precept. Again, dictionary definitions. In a general sense, any commandment or order intended as an authoritative rule of action, but applied particularly to commands respecting moral conduct. The 10 Commandments are some precepts for the regulation of our moral conduct. In law, a command or mandate in writing. Then here's some synonyms: commandment, injunction, mandate, law, rule, direction, principle. Okay? So these are the verses that many people like to use. Isaiah 28, 10 and 13. Okay? So let's see what it says here. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. Here a little, there a little. So you see precept is the Hebrew word, Strong's number H6673. Okay? Verse 13. But the word of the Lord was unto them precept upon precept, precept upon precept. Again, H6673. This strong number is the same strong number for all 8 of these precept words you see on the screen. Okay? How the blue man defines precept, H6673. So we're going to go over there real quick. Let me type it in here. Okay. So what we see here, Strong's H6673, and here's the pronunciation.
Strong's H 6673. Salve. Salve. Second entry. Salve. Salve.
Salve. Okay, we'll go with that. You can see here, salve was translated to English 9 times. We just read 8 of them. Okay, so 9 times, and 8 times it was translated to the English word precept. 1 time, commandment. Okay, so let's go look at the biblical usage of this salve word. It says command, ordinance, oracle. Then we see right here it says meaning dubious. Why is that in there? Well, it says right here, used in mocking mimicry of Isaiah's words, and thus not a true divine command. What does that mean? Definitions, okay? We see here an injunction, commandment, precept. Okay, commandment, precept. Actually, it's the only 2 English translations. I'm going to leave it right there for now. Let's go back over here. And I just want to say, it didn't seem too positive, but let me see what my notes say here. So what we see here is 9 times it was translated, 8 times precept. Biblical usage, it says used in mocking mimicry of Isaiah's words. Okay? Doesn't seem positive. Lord willing, we plan on doing a separate video on this concept called precept upon precept in Isaiah 28 in the future. However, just yesterday, prior to this recording, my brother pointed out that Masada is going to put out something, I think, the day after this recording. So I think he may have beat me to it, and I did not have it ready, so I should have pulled it up so I can show you the thumbnail. But Masada is going to put out something, I think, the day after this recording that I'm recording it. Not the day that it's put out, but the day today that I'm recording. So Masada, shout out to you. I plan on watching it intently. I have a feeling we're going to be on some agreeable ground. Okay, that's all I want to say about that. Okay, now we have the Blue Man and Precept H4687. Okay, 4687. So briefly review the Strongs. Let me go over there. 4687. Okay. So what do we see here? We got Strong's 4687, and we're going to listen to how they pronounce it.
Strong's H 4687. Mitzvah. Mitzvah.
Mitzvah. Mitzvah. You see, it's 181 times that mitzvah was translated to English. Okay? And we are on precept here, and we're going to see that out of 181, it was translated to commandments 177 times. Precept, just 4. Just 4. So what's that mean? Maybe it should have just been commandments. That's just a layperson reading this. However, I just want to point out some extra credit stuff here. If you add up how many times this was translated, plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this, you get more than 181. So somehow in there, I think maybe the Blue Man didn't use his calculator. So let's see what it says right here. So we see it says commandment, commandment of men, commandment of God, commandment, code of wisdom. Okay, and we're on precept right now. Doesn't seem like it's a good precept translation. Okay, I don't make the rules. So let me see what it says right here. Strong's definition, we just went over this 181 times. And precept was only 4 times the English word used when translating that Hebrew word. And we just pointed out how maybe the count should be 185, not 181. Okay, the Strong's number is more suited for commandments or commandment. I agree. Maybe the descriptor precept should not be used for a translation from Hebrew to English for H4687 or H6673 as it relates to the law, in my opinion. The Israelite writings, Precept 6490. Okay, let's see here. We got Psalm 119:4, KJV. Thou hast commanded us to keep thy precepts diligently. Okay, 6490. Psalm 119:15. Okay, I will meditate in thy precepts. Okay, 6490. We're going to go over there and we're going to take a look at it. Okay, here we are. And here it is, strong, 6490, and it's this right here, pronunciation, and you're going to hear that it doesn't add the ing part. So here you don't see the ing part, but it's going to add it.
Strong's H6490. Pikudim. Pikudim.
Pikudim. Pikudim. So you can see that Pikudim was translated 24 times into English, and you can see precept 21 times. So that kind of tells me maybe precept is the right, correct word for this English translation of this Hebrew word. We also see commandment and statute, okay? So we see three different descriptors for the same Hebrew word, okay? Usage, very simple, precept, statute. Okay, so let's go down here and we're going to look at a couple things. So in Psalm 19:8, you see it says the statutes, H6490, and not precept. 103:18, Psalm, it says commandments. So remember his commandments. It said precepts, but it says commandments for some reason. 6490, Psalm 111:7 says here, all his commandments. 6490. It said precepts, but it didn't. But let's look down here in 119, Psalm 119. You're going to see it says, keep thy precepts diligently. Psalm 119:15. I will meditate in thy precepts. 119:27. Make me to understand the way of thy precepts. Okay, so if you look in Psalm 119 and scroll all the way to the bottom, every single Psalm 119 verse has precepts in it. Okay? So, what does that mean? That means Psalm 119 is the precept chapter. Okay? You want to read about precepts? Go to Psalm 119. Judgment Descriptor. Okay, here we go. We're going to do judgments now and see what it is, okay? So, recall that we are defining all these particular words, descriptors, since they are used in reference to the law throughout the Israelite writings. Again, it's just a reminder why we're going through all these descriptors, because they're used to describe parts of the law, sometimes the whole law. How they define judgment, dictionary. The act or process of the mind in comparing its ideas, process of examining facts and arguments, process of examining the relations between one proposition and another to find their agreement or disagreement and to ascertain truth. In law, the sentence of doom pronounced in any cause, civil or criminal, by the judge or court by which it is tried. Judgment though pronounced by the judge or court, is properly the determination or sentence of the law. This one is important. Okay? The judge should never be deciding what he says or she says. The judge should always decide based on what does the law say. Okay? And then render a verdict. The right or power of passing sentence. The conclusion or result of judging, determination, an opinion, a decision. In Scripture, the spirit of wisdom and prudence enabling a person to discern right and wrong, good and evil. A remarkable punishment an extraordinary calamity inflicted by God on sinners. Mandate or sentence of God as the judge of all. Okay? Out of all of the descriptors, this seems the easiest to identify and understand. It has all of the courtroom-like verbiage associated with it. Okay, so that makes it the easiest descriptor when using it in how to define the law. And of course, the judgment is the result of something. It's not the actual command itself, in my opinion. Now we're going to look at 4941, H4941. Okay, here we see two different verses. Right here it says Exodus 24:3. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. Okay, 49:41. Leviticus 18:4. Ye shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances. Okay, 49:41. Recall earlier we viewed H49:41 in the blue man and highlighted this definition regarding ordinance. Okay, ordinance. And here's what we saw. All these words, they seem like they fit judgment. Okay, remember, divine law, verdict, the penalty. Okay, judge, judgment, sentence. Okay, this is the same Strong's number for judgments in Exodus 24:3 and Leviticus 18:4 we just read. Also, judgment is used 296 out of 421 instances to translate the Hebrew word H49:41. Judgment looks like a good descriptor for the law or parts of the law, in my opinion. Commandment Descriptor. Okay, so now we're going to hit commandment right here. And we're going to look and see what it's all about. How they define commandment. A mandate, an order or injunction given by authority, charge, precept. One of the 10 laws or precepts given by God to the Israelites at Mount Sinai. The Decalogue or moral law written on tables of stone. The act of commanding, exercise of authority, coercive power. Here's an example for H4687, commandments, Exodus 24:12. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou may teach them. There are 14 Hebrew words translated to commandment within the Israelite writings. I like H4687 as it relates to Exodus 24:12 right up here. Leviticus 4:2, KJV. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things, okay? Any of the commandments. This is simple and crystal clear. It says any of the commandments. However, not all verses are this straightforward. Okay, question. Do these commandments include laws, statutes, ordinances, precepts, and judgments?
That's something to think about.
Okay, it says any of the commandments. But what about these other descriptors that we went over? Okay, something to think about. Okay, how the blue man defines commandment, H4687. So, point out that all the translations are commandment. Okay, 4687. So we're going to look at 4687. Okay, so what do we have here? Strong's H4687. How do they pronounce that Hebrew word?
Strong's H4687. Mitzvah. Mitzvah.
Mitzvah. Okay. So, translated 181 times, and we are on commandment here. And as you can see, commandments is the one that is translated the most. That kind of tells me, well, this is probably the main Hebrew word that should be used, translated to the word commandment in English. Okay, so we went over this already, and so we'll go over it again here real quick. It says commandment, commandment of man, the commandment of God. And I want to highlight this one thing down here in the definition. Okay, it says a command, whether human or divine, collectively the law. Okay, collectively the law. There's another descriptor that has something like this that I forgot to point out. I think it's precept. But here you see collectively the law. Okay, law, ordinance, precept. Let's go back. Okay, so we see here outline of biblical usage, commandment of God, of man, code of wisdom. Strong's definition, collectively the law. Okay, usage definitions are all singular. That's just an observation. This could mean the entire law. Well, based on this, it does look like the entire law. Okay, so it appears to be saying that the Lord is commanding Moses and the people of Israel to perform and obey the entire law, is what it looked like it's saying. Or the Lord is telling Moses that he is giving the people all of the commandments to perform and or obey. So I kind of said the same thing, slightly different. In either case, this appears to be talking about the entire or complete written law in Exodus 24:12 and Leviticus 4:2. Okay, the two verses that we just read. Let's continue. Decree. Now they define decree. Several descriptors have decree in their definitions, either in a dictionary or in the Blue Man, either by direct or indirect reference, or circular definition. A descriptor is defined by another descriptor that includes decree. Okay, so what is decree? Judicial decision or determination of a litigated cause. The decision of a court of equity is called a decree. In the civil law, a determination or judgment of the emperor on a suit between parties. An edict or law made by a council for regulating any business within their jurisdiction, as the decrees of ecclesiastical councils, church councils. In general, an order, edict, or law made by a superior as a rule to govern inferiors. Established law or rule. In theology, predetermined purpose of God, the purpose or determination of an immutable being whose plan of operations is, like himself, unchangeable. Decree, the verb, to determine judicially, to resolve by sentence, to determine or resolve legislatively, to fix or appoint, to set or constitute by edict or in purpose, to order, to ordain. Decree within the Israelite writings, Ezra 5 and 13, KJV. But in the first year of Cyrus the king of Babylon, the same King Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God. Ezra 6 and 1, KJV. Then Darius the king made a decree. Okay. Esther 9 and 32, KJV. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim. Okay. Daniel 3 and 10, KJV. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear. Okay. So just want to point out that when you think of a decree, it is typically given by someone who is in power. For example, a king or a queen. Quick descriptor summary. Okay, here's a quick summary before we move on to the law descriptor. Descriptor summary. Using the Israelite writings alone to describe the law is difficult. Using English descriptors to describe or define the law can be difficult. Descriptors are used to define descriptors and are interchangeable. Also, circular definition. Ordinances does not appear to be a good translation for any of the 5 Hebrew words we discussed. However, the word itself is a good word. Psalm 119 is a good precept chapter for H6490. Precept does not appear to be a good English translation for H4687 or H6673 as it relates to the law. Judgment, H4941, is a good descriptor for parts of the law. Decree is used in several descriptor definitions and is typically given by someone who is in power. Good word for use in describing parts of the law. Commandment, H4687, is a good descriptor for the law. At times, it appears to mean the entire law, collectively, the law. Law descriptor. Okay, now we're going to go over the last descriptor, and that's law. Okay? How they define law. There are many definitions or attributes of the word law. I cut down the amount of detail for law in this presentation, just making this presentation too long. Please do your own research on law for additional attributes. Okay, let me get my research guy.
Remember, do your own research.
Remember, do your own research. I'm encouraging you to research all the attributes of law. Okay? A rule, particularly an established or permanent rule, prescribed by the supreme power of a state to its subjects for regulating their actions or enforce its will, particularly their social actions. A controlling regulation. Laws are imperative or mandatory, commanding what shall be done, prohibitory or permissive, declaring what may be done without incurring penalty. Laws of nations, the rules that regulate the mutual intercourse of nations or states. Moral law, a law which prescribes to men their religious and social duties, in other words, their duties to God and to each other. The moral law is summarily contained in the Decalogue, aka the 10 Commandments, written by the finger of God on 2 tables of stone and delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai. Written law, a law or rule of action prescribed or enacted by a sovereign and published and recorded in writing, a written statute, ordinance, edict, or decree. Laws which enjoin the duties of piety and morality. Okay, so the moral law we just read here is virtually the same as one of the definitions of commandment. Okay, so this one here. Ecclesiastical law, a rule of action prescribed for the government of a church, otherwise called canon law. So whenever you see canon something, when it comes to a church ecclesiastical meeting, canon is what they use to describe their laws or doctrines. Mosaic law, the institutions of Moses, or the code of laws prescribed to the Jews as distinguished from the gospel. The Jewish or Mosaic code, in that part of the scripture where it is written in distinction from the gospel. Distinction. Hence also the Old Testament. Ceremonial law, the Mosaic institutions which prescribe the external rites and ceremonies to be observed by the Jews as distinct from the moral precepts, which are perpetual obligations. Okay? Then there are also the unwritten or common laws, rule of action which derives its authority from long usage or established custom, which has been received from beyond memory, so like a long time ago, and I think they're trying to allude to the oral Torah. Subliminal messaging. It appears that these definitions are adding a message. Recall it said distinguished from the gospel. Distinguished, separated or known by a mark of difference or by different qualities. Recall it said distinction from the gospel. Distinction, separated from others by distinct difference. These appear to be some subliminal messaging. They are clearly saying that the Mosaic Law is not the same and is quite different than the gospel. Why would they say that? It's obvious. They want to make sure that we do not obey any of the Mosaic Law.
That's something to think about.
Okay? Keep that in mind. In general, these are the typical categories many people will use to describe the groupings of the law. Okay? They call it moral laws, which address fundamental human relationships and ethics. Ceremonial laws, which regulate worship and ritual practices. Civil laws, which address social and economic relationships within the Israelite society. When reading the definition of law in these two dictionaries I'm about to show you, you might get the impression you are reading a Christian sermon. That is the Easton's Bible Dictionary and the Moorish Bible Dictionary. These are dictionaries, but when you read their definition of law, you think you're reading a Christian sermon. Okay?
Look it up.
Look it up. These two dictionaries read like commentaries. Smith's Bible Dictionary, Fawcett's Bible Dictionary, okay?
Look it up.
Look it up. I encourage everyone to view the content of the Easton, Moorish, Smith, and Fawcett's dictionaries for additional definitions and their attributes of law. For time's sake, I gotta move on. How DOI defines law, okay? Everything up to this point was to get to this point. That is, how do we understand what is the law? Okay? Some comments. It is confusing when you have one Hebrew word translated into many English words, or one English word used to translate many Hebrew words. In math terms, this is a many-to-many relationship. DOI views are not doctrine. This is not thus saith the Lord. This is the brothers say. This is the brothers think. This is the brothers' opinion, based on how we interpret the text. That's it. Okay, that's all it is. Okay, the Israelite writings, Law 84:51. So we're going to see in Exodus 24 and 12. This is a good verse I like. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone and a law and commandments, which I have written that thou may teach them. Okay, Law 84:51, Commandments 46:87. So 84:51. Let's go over there and see what it says. 84:51. Hold on with me. Okay, it's over here. So as you can see here, we're in Strong's H 84:51. Okay, let's hear the pronunciation.
Strong's H 84:51. Torah. Torah.
I don't roll my R's, okay? Torah. Okay, we can see here, Torah, the Hebrew word, was translated 219 times to English in the Old Testament, Israelite writings. And every single time the English word was law. Okay? So let's look at some of the biblical usage. Law, direction, instruction, direction, prophetic teaching. Okay? Law of the burnt offering, special law, codes of law. You see, it's all about law. A precept or statute, especially the Decalogue, Ten Commandments or the Pentateuch, Mosaic books, law. Okay, let's go back. So I believe this is the pivotal verse when it comes to defining what is the law, combining Strong's H8451 and H4687 right here in Exodus 24 and 12. So the DOI translation of 24 and 12. I believe the following passage can be translated this way, in my opinion. 24:12 DOI version. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount and be there, and I will give thee stone tablets, a law, the commandment in its entirety, which I have written, that thou may teach them. Okay? I believe this is an example of emphasis speech, just like the phrase, and be there. So you heard me say it a couple of times. I emphasize the and be there. So let's look at this. Come up to me into the mount. So if you go up to the mountain and you're there, why does it say and be there? Well, of course you're going to be there because it just said come up to the mount. So I think this is just emphasis speech. Okay? So I believe when it says here, and commandments which I have written, that the commandments are emphasizing and or describing the law preceding it. Okay? And according to Strong's number H4687, for commandment, the definition includes collectively the law. So I believe Moses was given the entire law while he was on the mount. This is how I read it. It is my opinion only, not doctrine. Okay? So when you see before it has the ands in there, it look like there's different things. Well, I think really it's just emphasis speech. The law, Torah. Since Exodus 24:12 translates the word law from the Hebrew word Torah, then DOI will use Torah, a complete set of instructions, as our main word when discussing the law. In an attempt to further describe and or define the Torah, I created a definition from each descriptor, including decree, to see if I could uniquely define each one, and then put them together to help describe and or define the Torah. Okay? So once again, our goal in this video up to this point was to get here, okay? The DOI definition. So our attempt to somewhat uniquely define each descriptor is as follows. Law, permanent rule by God in writing to regulate human activity. Statute, binding force on all citizens regarding time, space, quantity, labor, or usage. Ordinance, a divine rule established by God. Precept, written mandate regulating moral conduct. Judgment, the outcome as determined by the letter of the law enacted by God as the ultimate judge. I emphasized this before. The judgment is based on what's in the law. So a judge should not go outside of the bounds of the law when creating a sentence. Decree, predetermined purpose of an unchangeable God. Commandment, the entire law given as a mandate by someone in authority. Okay? So, let me get this straight. If the previous DOI definitions are somewhat accurate, then the Torah is the divine and predetermined collection of permanent written laws regulating the moral and personal conduct of the nation of Israel, ordained by the Most High.
That's something to think about.
Okay? Something to think about. Remaining agenda. I will try to go through the remaining agenda as quickly as possible. Torah, what is included, excluded. Torah given to the Israelites. Torah is a covenant and sign. Torah is everlasting and righteousness. Torah is truth and perfect. Torah, what is included? These are the descriptors which are used in describing the Torah or parts of it. Okay, we went over this: law, statutes, ordinance, precepts, judgments, and commandments. There is a common theme amongst all of these, as well as the Torah itself. They regulate human behavior and conduct. These are things that Israelites are to perform or not perform. Okay, Torah regulates human behavior and or conduct. Exodus 18 and 20 KJV. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Okay? They must walk, they must do. Exodus 19, 7 and 8 KJV. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all the words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Okay? Deuteronomy 6:1 KJV. Now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land. Okay, do them. 2 Kings 17 and 37 KJV. And the statutes and the ordinances and the law and the commandment which he wrote for you, ye shall observe to do forevermore. Okay? You should do it. So these are things that you should do. Torah, what is excluded? This might confuse some people, like we're trying to take out an offering or something, but we're not. Torah excludes. It is our understanding as we read the Israelite writings that the Torah, the Mosaic Law, specifically does not include items and or stories which do not regulate human behavior and or conduct. Many claim that the Law of Moses is the Pentateuch, meaning the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We do not believe the actual Torah includes stories such as Adam and Eve, for example. Genesis 4:1 KJV. Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Is there a command in this verse that Israelites are to obey or perform? Genesis 6:14 KJV. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shall pitch it within and pitch it without. Okay? Is building the ark like Noah did a command for the Israelites to perform? Are we supposed to obey this? Is that for us? Okay. Torah summary, included, excluded. It is our understanding that the Torah only includes laws that regulate human behavior and or conduct, instruct Israelites on what to perform or not to perform. It is our understanding that the Torah does not include stories such as Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, numbering of the people. Okay? We are not closed-minded and are open for discussion relating to our interpretation on this topic or any topic, okay? This is just an opinion. Building an ark, for example, I don't think we're supposed to do that. So that's why I don't think it's part of the actual Torah. It doesn't mean it's not attributed to the, books of Moses. It's just, is it Torah? Torah given to Israelites. Okay, Exodus 34, 29, 31, and 32. And it came to pass when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai with 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, and Moses called unto them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord has spoken with him in Mount Sinai. Okay? Torah was given to Israel. Abraham obeyed oral Torah. Is that true?
Here is some extra credit for those who are taking the class.
Let's see what it has to say here. Genesis 26:5, extra credit. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Okay, this word laws here is H8451. It is Torah. Okay, it is Torah. So it looks like he's obeying basically a full set of commands back in his day before Israelites. Okay?
That's something to think about.
Something to think about. Abraham kept the law. Let's see what it says in Sirach 44:19 and 20 RSV. Abraham was the great father of a multitude of nations, and no one has been found like him in glory. He kept the law of the Most High. Okay? He kept the law of the Most High and was taken into covenant with him. He established a covenant in his flesh, and when he was tested, he was found faithful. Okay?
That's something to think about.
He kept the law of the Most High. Oral Torah given to Abraham. Did Abraham obey the Torah? Looks like it. Was it written down? Not sure. It says, obey my voice. Was it a complete Torah? Not sure again. For example, there were no actual Levites to perform all the commandments pertaining to the Levites. There was also no tabernacle, etc., that we know of. Okay? So the Torah may have been complete for Abraham's generation and lifetime, so keep that in mind. We don't know if it was complete, but it may have been complete for his time. Okay?
That's something to think about.
So keep that in mind. Commandments H4687 mitzvah for Abraham is the same as we saw before in Exodus 24:12. Collectively, the law. Jeremiah 31:33. I will put my law, Torah, in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. Okay? Looks like the revelation of the Torah is transitioning from oral to written to inward parts. Okay?
That's something to think about.
Okay, that's something to think about. The revelation of the Torah may be transitioning, but not the Torah itself. As far as we know, we will be under the Mosaic Law until all has been fulfilled. Okay? So when I say transitioning, it just looks like it's going from oral to written to inward. But we're still under the Mosaic Law until all is fulfilled. That's our understanding. Okay? So again, this was just extra credit.
Here is some extra credit for those who are taking the class.
Torah is covenant and sign. Okay. Exodus 19:5. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then. Okay. Leviticus 26:3 and 4. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then. Okay, so Exodus 19:5 right here actually says covenant. Okay, Leviticus 26:3 and 4 mentions a couple Torah descriptors. Both passages are examples of a covenant or agreement between Israel and the Most High. Why? There's an agreement. If something happens, then you get the reciprocal here. If something happens, then something's going to happen. Okay, one can simply read the text and draw a conclusion that there is an agreement made, a covenant. How they define covenant: a mutual agreement of two or more persons or parties, or one of the stipulations in such an agreement. Man's covenant with his fellow or nation with nation, in which the terms are mutually considered and agreed to. It is then ratified by an oath or by some token before witnesses. Promises of God as revealed in the scriptures, conditioned on certain terms on the part of man as obedience, repentance, faith, etc. An agreement between two parties. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word berith is always thus translated. Berith is derived from a root which means to cut. A covenant is cutting or dividing of animals in two parts, and the contracting parties passing between them, making a covenant. Genesis 15, Jeremiah 34, 18 and 19. A covenant of salt signifies an everlasting covenant in the sealing or ratifying of which salt, as an emblem of perpetuity, is used. Numbers 18, 19, Leviticus 2 and 13, 2 Chronicles 13 and 5. Covenant within the Israelite writings here, H1285. We're going to go to Exodus 2 and 24. And God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Covenant, H1285. Exodus 31:16, KJV. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. Okay, so covenant is just a treaty, it's an alliance. Okay, for sake of time, I'm not going to check out the blue man this time. Torah, covenant and sign, Exodus 31 and 13. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbath ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Deuteronomy 4, 5 and 6, KJV. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments. 6. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, Surely this great nation is wise and understanding people. Okay? Why are they wise and understanding? Because they are doing the statutes and judgments. Okay? For this is your wisdom and understanding. Torah is everlasting and righteousness. Okay, Exodus 31, 16 and 17. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. Okay? 2 Kings 17:37. And the statutes and the ordinances and the laws and the commandment which he wrote for you, ye shall observe to do forevermore. Okay? Some will argue that perpetual is not everlasting, and everlasting is not for all eternity. Regardless, this looks to be a long time and does not end anytime soon. Matthew 5 and 18, KJV. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law. Greek 35:51, till all be fulfilled. Okay? Conclusion, the Torah will be here for a long time. So, Yahawashi said that heaven and earth have to pass before some changes to the law will be made. Okay? How the blue man defines this law. Okay, G 35:51. So we're going to go there real quick, 35:51, and we're just going to quickly review this. Okay. So as you can see here, Strong's 35:51. How do they pronounce this word?
Strong's G 35:51. Namas. Namas.
Namas. Okay, so you can see here, it's been translated, that Greek word, 197 times into English, and every single time it was translated to the English word law. But what is law? Anything established, received by usage, a custom, a law, a command. Okay, any law whatsoever. Of the Mosaic Law, and referring to the context, either to the volume of the law or to its contents. I want to hit number 3 here. The Christian religion. The law demanding faith. The moral instruction given by Christ. Okay, understand this. When Christ walked the earth, there was no Christian religion. Okay, so when I think up to Christ time, I don't think of 3 here because it just didn't exist. Okay, so let's go back real quick. So we just pointed out namas, translated 197 times, every single time to the English word law. Biblical usage, a law, precept, or command approved by God, the Mosaic Law, either to volume or to its contents. Okay? And then the note that I just pointed out, Christianity did not exist while Yahawashi walked this earth. The Greek G3551, namas, is the same as the Hebrew 8451, Torah, because Yahawashi followed the Torah, in my opinion. Torah's righteousness, Deuteronomy 6:24 and 25. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as it is at this day. And it shall be our righteousness. Okay, what should be? The statutes. If we observe to do all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he hath commanded us. Okay? Statutes, commandments. They shall be our righteousness. Righteousness, the noun. How do they define it? Conformity of heart and life to the divine law. Holiness, purity, uprightness, the cause of our justification. Righteousness, as used in scripture and theology, in which it is chiefly used, is nearly equivalent to holiness, comprehending holy principles and affections of heart, and conformity of life to the divine law. It includes all we call justice, honesty, and virtue with holy affections. In short, it is true religion. True religion. Righteousness, the adjective. Righteous, the adjective. Just according to the divine law. Applied to persons, it denotes one who is holy in heart and observant of the divine commands and practice as a righteous man. Free from wrong, guilt, or sin. The righteous in scripture denote the servants of God, the saints. Okay, we discussed that the saints are Israelites in the video Israelite writings, chosen people. Okay, who are saints? They're Israelites. We discussed that in the previous video. Torah is truth and perfect. Psalm 19:7-9 KJV. The law of the Lord is perfect. What's the law? 84:51. Torah. Okay, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. Verse 8. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Psalm 119, 142, KJV. The righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. What's the law? Torah is the truth. Nehemiah 9:13, KJV. Thou came down also upon Mount Sinai, and spoke with them from heaven, and gave them righteous judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments. What are the laws? Torah 84:51. Okay. Summary. What we discussed. We discussed definitions, law, statutes, ordinances, precepts, judgments, commandments, decrees, covenant, righteous, and righteousness. We discussed how difficult it is to define the law and the descriptors used to define the law. We pointed out different characteristics of the law given to Israelites: everlasting, covenant, sign, our righteousness, truth, and perfect. we provided our definition of the law, or Torah. Overview, the Torah. Okay, we discussed how the law, or Torah, is all of these things. Complete law, written by the Most High with his finger, and then later advised Moses to do some writing, given to Israelites. Covenant and a sign, everlasting, righteousness, truth, and perfect. And there are many who believe that it's going to be replaced with what? Torah replaced. Okay? So according to they, all of this has been changed or replaced with something. We will cover the something in an upcoming video in this series. Do you think what we will discuss in that video will be an upgrade? How do we go from perfect in truth to anything else? The early church fathers actually think they came up with something better than truth and perfect. For now, in the next video, we will discuss the importance of the law. This concludes today's discussion on the Mosaic Law defined, they definition, DOI definition. Hashtag law defined. Okay? Today's topic was on definitions of the law. In part 2 on this topic, we're going to discuss the importance of the law. In part 3 on this topic, we will discuss how the councils and church fathers diminished and or terminated the law of Moses, the Torah. What to expect. Lord willing, we will cover these topics in upcoming videos in our series on Christianity and the canon, okay? The importance of the law diminished, the promised land, boundary line adjustment, tabernacle, temple, the rebuild, Apocrypha, not so silent years, Septuagint, what books were in there? 22, 24, 39 book Old Testament. Which is it? All of these or none of these? New Testament canon, councils, synods, and church fathers, and canon by punishment. We want to thank you for watching Something to Think About. We would like to remind everyone that the views contained in this video are our personal opinions and were not meant to dictate any doctrine. I am Brother Mitch. My brother is Brother Mike. We are the brothers. We are disciples of Yahawashi. I want to say shalom and shalom to Israel. I want to say goodbye, Christians. Bye to everyone else. Till next time.
Follow the brothers.
On YouTube,
Fanbase.
X,
Hebrew Connect TV.
Rumble. Or visit their website.
See also Facebook, Gab, and Truth.
The following is an HBO special featuring the brothers.
Yo, can you help the brothers out?
HBO special.
you can use PayPal.
The brothers need some digital money.
Or you can use Cash App.
Every little bit helps.
Please support their efforts.
You can even use a credit card.
And Venmo.
Why are you selling cookies?
Please help support this organization.
It's okay if you can't give. Just spread the word.
That's just as important as giving.
Precept.